I now request Mr. Shyam Divan, our Vice President and President of Lawasia, to say a few words.
Thanks. Justice Rishikesh Roy, Justice Koteshwar Singh, Attorney General Venkatramani, distinguished eminence, ladies and gentlemen on the dais, off the dais, good evening. Very quickly, two quick vignettes which I thought I'd share. Not because you don't know about them, but because I learned about them only very recently. The first one's on Dr. Rajendra Prasad. And Rachna mentioned as to why we celebrate and mark today his birth anniversary as Lawyers for India Day. But I was reviewing a script for a podcast on Nandlal Bose. And as you know, Nandlal Bose and his team illustrated the Constitution of India. So the researchers were sort of getting to the bottom of it. How did this happen? And it was quite remarkable, and it involved Dr. Rajendra Prasad. So initially, when the Constituent Assembly was working, there was really no plan to have an illustrated constitution. But the correspondence of Dr. Rajendra Prasad reveals that in October of 1949, he writes to Nandlal Bose. Nandlal Bose by then was very well known, and some of you may remember that beautiful painting of Gandhi with the staff, which is iconic. And that was a Nandlal Bose picture. So he had a connection with Gandhi. And he, of course, was at Shantiniketan and so therefore connected to Tagore. But Rajendra Prasad wrote to him in October 1949 that would you engage in this artistic, political, and really important venture of illustrating the Constitution. And he writes back and says, yes, of course, it would be his honor. And he starts work in December 1949. And you can imagine how quickly he and his team had to work because, barely was the sort of paintings dry that the whole Constitution had to be calligraphed. And then by 26 January, it was right there to be adopted and to come into full force. So that was the Dr. Rajendra Prasad story. The other one, I pick up on what Mr. Chandiok mentioned a short while ago, which involves, I think, values, the bar, and the bench. And this is about a case which is, it's of course in the law reports, it's known as Gigi Boy. And it involved a tricky situation because there was a challenge to an act which had been upheld by the Bombay High Court, an amendment in Maharashtra, at that time Bombay, to the Land Acquisition Act, which prescribed that all valuation would be on 1st of January 1948. Bombay High Court upheld it, came up to the Supreme Court. The bench was presided over by Chief Justice Rajendra Gadkar. And, Justice Rajendra Gadkar was member of a society which might have benefited from the land acquisition. So it became a very tricky situation. Who was to tell the Chief Justice of India to recuse? So Purushottam Trikamdas, senior advocate, was briefed in the matter because many people who were otherwise engaged declined. And he raised an objection. And he raised it. And Chief Justice Rajendra Gadkar was initially disinclined, but he turned to Attorney General Daftari. And Daftari informed him that, look, in the Supreme Court of India, it must look completely fair. And so even if there is a slight perception of or a possibility of bias, then we shouldn't. And to the credit of Chief Justice Rajendra Gadkar, he recused from the case. It was decided eventually by Justice Subba Rao, and the Bombay High Court decision was reversed. So I thought I should just share that with you. I learned about this from Avinash Rana, who is a doyen of the Bombay Bar. He's at 95 and he's furiously penning and completing a book called Miscellany at Law. And I was just reviewing a draft in which he narrates this incident about Purushottam Trikamdas. What he isn't writing in the book, but which I will share with you, but because he mentioned it to me, and when you read the law report, it's quite interesting. Because, lawyers, all of us are trained. So there's Purushottam Trikamdas taking up this objection. But also on the same side was another leader of the Bombay Bar, J.C. Bhatt, and Nani Palkhiwala. And before Purushottam Trikamdas could articulate the objection, they stood up and said, we are not identifying with this particular objection to be made. So Avinash Rana says that, but that's the way it works in court. We have to just ensure that we are eventually in the service of the client. So thank you very much, and I trust this is going to be a splendid evening where we honor some of our distinguished colleagues. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Divan, for sharing that anecdote with us. And